What does it mean to be Deputy Commissioner of GSA's Federal Acquisition Service, FAS, and Director of its Technology Transformation Services, TTS? What are the best ways we can reimagine the delivery of digital government services? And what has been the impact of innovation across the federal government? Today, I'll explore these questions and so much more with Dave Zvenyach, former Deputy Commissioner of the U.S. General Services Administration's Federal Acquisition Service and former Director of GSA's Technology Transformation Services. Dave, you were both Deputy Commissioner of FAS and Director of TTS. So how did you juggle both roles? And more importantly, Dave, how were both titles and roles and portfolios complementary to one another?
Yeah, so a bit of a candid admission. I didn't so much juggle it as focus my energies on the TTS side. That said, I think that there's a lot of interaction, a lot of support that goes between the Federal Acquisition Service and Technology Transformation Services. So on the practical side, we share a lot of customers and we share a lot of opportunities and challenges. So working really closely with the IT category as they're putting together contract vehicles for agencies on emerging technology and existing sort of cloud computing services. We have a great partnership with Laura and the whole team at ITC on things like artificial intelligence and bringing the TTS's technical expertise to bear with the procurement expertise of FAS. We also have a lot of interconnections just in terms of the day-to-day work. So I worked really closely with Mark Lee in the Office of Policy and Compliance to make sure that TTS and FAS were working closely in terms of good technology policy and as well as good acquisition policy as it relates to tech. So spending a lot of time sort of at the intersection between FAS and TTS, and both programs really, I think, work best when we're working together. But personally, I'll admit that most of my attention in the last 20 months have been focused really on TTS specifically.
When you were in your last role as director of TTS, what were your key focus areas and core priorities during that time?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible what some time and success can do. I had been the executive director of 18F from 2016 through part of 2017, and had been with 18F from 2015 to 20 in that time. And, one of the things that's interesting is, and I spent a lot of time reflecting on this too, when I joined the federal government in 2015, the word agile was just like, nobody could imagine you could have government that even thinks in terms of agile. I remember going to conferences and sitting on panels and people say, government can't do agile. And fast forward to 2022, yeah, everyone accepts the fact that governments both can and should be doing agile, and basically everyone claims that they are. And so one of the things that's really interesting is that, I had joked with Claire Martirana, the federal CIO, that at some points the civic technology, sort of movement won, and it sort of reminded me of Robert Redford from The Candidates. Wins the election, and there's a big focus on winning the election, and it's like, we won. Now what? And so I think where we were and where I was in sort of the period from 2015 to 2017 with 18F and TTS before was really about trying to bring slightly different perspectives to what government's delivery needed. Like I said, agile was not a thing. The idea of user-centered design and sort of customer experience at that time was pretty novel. Really outside of pockets of individual agencies and sort of communities that emerged in the e-government space, the rhetoric of of customer experience was really pretty not common. It was pretty isolated, and so the focus had been, how do we bring this sort of these concepts to the table? How do we prove that they can work? And how do we help agencies implement them? And so I do think back pretty fondly of those early days for my tenure at GSA, because we had a lot of really incredible wins. We helped, the Federal Election Commission to completely refresh its presence. We helped Treasury with the establishment of USAspending.gov and sort of see the emergence and implementation of the Data Act, which, in some respects was the first government-wide agile project. And, you had a series of these efforts, programs that are now really effective, like the US Web Design System and the creation of login.gov. Those all happened in, like I said, that mid to late 2010s. So that was a lot of the focus before. Personally, I also spent a lot of time and energy on trying to position 18F specifically focused on our agency partners, really trying to get out of the quote unquote innovation space and moving it more toward the to the value delivery space. That had been a lot of my focus as 18F director. I think there were some just practical realities and sort of financial constraints, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that and sort of how that still continues to play out today. But a lot of the energy at that time was to say, how do we prove that some of this works, and how do we really help partners implement it?
Well, that's a great point. Given your background, Dave, what have you sort of ascertained is the best way agencies can deliver digital government services that always keeps in mind transparency, security, and efficiency? Are there any, best practices, any success stories, any good way to reimagine these things?
Totally. I actually start from a principle here, and it's I don't remember who popularized it, but it's one that I've thought about a lot over the years. Is the idea of the Red Queen hypothesis. And the Red Queen hypothesis is it owes its origins to evolutionary biology, and it's a specific reference to Alice in Wonderland. And the idea is that you have Alice who's being dragged by the Red Queen, and they're running, and they're running so fast. And at some points they're running and they end up in the same place where they were before. And Alice goes to the Queen, like, why? I thought we were running. Why are we in the same place? And the Red Queen says, well, around here, you have to run twice as fast to just stay where you are. And one of the things that teaches is that in technology, things are evolving all the time, whether you like it or not. Government tech doesn't operate just in the context of government tech. It operates in the context of tech. And so there are all kinds of changes happening in the technology industry that influence and inform how the government has to deliver our services. If all we had to do was just keep the lights on, so to speak, it might not be such a challenge, but you actually have to move twice as fast just to keep the lights on. And so one of the lessons that I think is really important as a best practice is actually to try to do less. There's a really significant instinct to want to own the entire stack, to do it all, sort of manage it yourself, but you'll never keep up. You'll never be able to maintain the pace that's needed to keep up with the evolutionary trends in technology. And so to me, the best way that agencies should think about getting those sort of best practices in security, accessibility, user experience, and so on and so forth, is to actually invest in, or rather divest its responsibility for parts of the stack and invest in partnerships with other companies or other programs that do this really well. I've mentioned US Web Design System a couple of times, and I'll do it again here. The US Web Design System enables, billions of views per year. And the thing about that is it invests in accessibility practices. It invests in sort of the modern web standards. So as browsers update, the US Web Design System updates, and agencies can get the benefit of that updated US Web Design System without having to re-architect and do that work itself. I think a greater interdependence and a greater awareness that you can't own the entire experience yourself is actually what's necessary to keep up with the changing landscape.
So, Dave, given your stints in federal service in your last one, what has been the impact, in your perspective, about innovation across the federal government?
And this is where I like to situate our work. I mentioned, stretching back to the 1960s. I think about our work in sort of in a long term. Given the fact that TTS and sort of now has been around for over 50 years in sort of different incarnations, it compels me to think about the fact that we're going to be doing this work for another 50 years. Regulations.gov is the thing that we have today. My guess is 20 years from now, there's still going to be the need for agency regulations and still going to be the need for public comment on regulations. Forecast 40 years from now, my guess is the government's still going to be buying things and probably going to be buying things using, a common registry like sam.gov. So I think one of the interesting aspects is that, innovation is both what's old is new. Things that have been around are going to continue to have needs for the public, but we need to continue to find better ways of delivering and continuing to open new paths for that delivery. In sort of the spirit of what's old is new again, I mentioned 1966 in the Federal Information Center. This was an in-person contact in Atlanta, Georgia. And obviously over the decades, it became increasingly contact centers and phone centers and then, digital websites. But now there's an increasing focus on omnichannel experiences. How do you not just have the federal website, but also have that connected to your contact center and even in-person interactions? And so I think as we think about innovation, it's important to draw the improvements that we deliver and sort of the iterative improvements that we make, but anchor that all the time back into the public need and continue to update our own expectations for service delivery based on the expectations of the users that we serve.
That's an excellent point and a nice transition to the next question I have really quickly. It's around what key areas and emerging technologies show the most promise for helping government meet mission outcomes?
So this is always a dangerous question because you're almost always wrong. But I do think that there are two technologies that are relatively, they're no longer quite emerging. They've emerged, but they're still relatively nascent in terms of adoption. And one of them is, obviously we're still seeing the incredible explosion in capabilities out of machine learning and artificial intelligence. OpenAI launched this thing called Whisper, which is a speech to text sort of transcription tool. And it's extraordinarily remarkable. It's I can run it on my laptop and be able to convert audio to text pretty reliably. And it's this sort of a thing was inconceivable a decade ago. It's happening today. And so when you start to think about the changes that have arisen from neural networks and just general advancements in AI ML, that strikes me as an area that is going to continue to pay dividends. Another emerging technology, though, and this is in the category of AI ML, though it's a slightly different subset, is areas around privacy enhancing technologies. Technologies like homomorphic encryption or federated learning, these types of what are called PETs or privacy enhancing technologies hold a lot of promise for the government because one of the challenges in government is that there is so much information and so much data, but it is so siloed in terms of agencies' sort of structures. And I think that PETs hold promise to allow for more confident interoperability among agency systems, and at the same time, protect the expectations and the privacy rights of the public that we serve. So I think that those two areas strike me as both technologies that have emerged, so to speak, but are still at relatively early stage adoption for the federal government.
The other question I have, Dave, is around what are some of the common challenges being faced across agencies that you saw during your tenure? And are there any specific successes you'd like to share and highlight solutions that make sense?
Great question. I think one of the areas of struggle, and this is common across agencies, is we still don't have really good expectations or practices or norms around engagement of users and as part of sort of usability testing or user research. There's still a strong tendency in government to build things and ask users later. And instead of doing ongoing user discovery, ongoing research, and doing it in a way that's equitable and that takes into consideration the fact that the government has, for much of its history, systematically excluded people from involvement in government systems. And so I think that's an area that we're going to continue to see both needs for investment and there's significant advancements in thinking that have happened over the last couple of years. But it's a challenge because it is a muscle that has not been flexed as much as it needs to be.
Dave, the last two questions, I want to combine them if you don't mind. And they are, what will you remember most about your government service and be most proud of? And perhaps taking that as a leaping off point to give advice to someone who may be thinking about a career in public service.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there are many things that I'm proud of. I think what I'm proudest of, it's a sense of working with other committed public servants. There are specific things where it's like, oh, that was a win. Like that felt good. But none of those things happen just because because I had some idea. It's because I was able to work with incredible public servants and folks across different divisions who had similar challenges and were excited to solve those problems. And so for me, the thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that I was able to participate in a community that was really trying to deliver better outcomes for the public. That I know that sounds sappy, but it's true. When I reflect back on my time, individual projects will feel cool, but the thing that will most that I'm most affected by is how much I've been changed by the people that I worked with, and how much we were able to move in common purpose for better outcomes for the public. And so for folks that are considering public service, I said this actually publicly not that long ago, which is that people say that public service is a sacrifice, and it just isn't. Public service is an opportunity to work with other really committed public servants who are incredibly talented individuals who are all focused on better outcomes for the public that we serve. And that's something that is a real opportunity and something that I just have an extraordinary amount of gratitude for personally.
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, Reflections on Public Service with Dave Zvenyach, former Deputy Commissioner of GSA's Federal Acquisition Service and former Director of its Technology Transformation Services. Subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Podcast One, iTunes, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.